am Sarah, a nurse by profession. For many years, I worked at one of the most renowned psychiatric hospitals in the country. Luckily, I no longer work there, a fact that brings me immense relief. This story, however, is about a series of chilling incidents I encountered during my time at that hospital. Working in a psychiatric ward is no easy task. Spending days with patients suffering from a spectrum of mental illnesses, from severe depression to schizophrenia, can be emotionally draining. Yet, over time, I had grown accustomed to it. Interacting with the patients, I thought I had seen it all, until she arrived. One day, a new patient, Emily, was admitted to the hospital. Since I wasn't stationed at the admission desk, I didn't know the details of her case or who had brought her in. Emily's behavior was unsettling from the start. Most patients with depression often displayed withdrawal symptoms, but Emily was different. She would sit silently for hours, staring in one direction, occasionally muttering incoherent phrases. One afternoon, I was tasked with administering an injection prescribed by the doctor. It was routine work, nothing I hadn't done 100 times before. But as I approached Emily, she suddenly lunged at me with such ferocity that I was thrown across the room. My syringe clattered to the floor as she kicked wildly, her face contorted in rage. The staff rushed in to restrain her, but she was unnaturally strong. It took a sedative injection to finally calm her down. Shaken and bruised, I couldn't help but feel something sinister in the way she looked at me, as if her rage was directed solely at me. From that day on, Emily's behavior took a peculiar turn. She only became aggressive in my presence. Every time our eyes met, her anger would flare up. She would glare at me as though she wanted to hurt me, her voice echoing in my mind long after she was sedated. Eventually, she was placed in isolation. Yet, even from her solitary confinement, I could feel her eyes following me. She would scream my name, accusing me of something I didn't understand. "Why are you doing this to me? What did I ever do to you? Let me go," she cried one day, her voice filled with anguish. The rules of the hospital forbade us from delving into patients' personal histories. That was the job of the psychiatrists and therapists, but I couldn't ignore the eerie connection I felt with Emily. My nights were plagued with nightmares of her staring at me, her hollow eyes filled with an unsettling mix of hatred and despair. One night, after a particularly disturbing dream, I decided to check on her before leaving for my weekend break. As I peered into her room, I saw her crouched in a corner, her long hair covering her face. Slowly she lifted her head and fixed her piercing eyes on me. Her face twisted into a grotesque grin. "You can't escape me," she whispered. Terrified, I hurried home to my village. The familiar rural landscape brought a brief sense of comfort, but the horrors of that night lingered. Turning the corner of the dark trail, I felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension as I noticed someone walking ahead of me. The dim moonlight revealed the silhouette of a young woman. Her long hair flowed behind her, and she seemed to glide more than walk. Her presence, though initially comforting, quickly became unsettling. There was an unnatural stillness to her movements, a kind of eerie grace that didn't sit well with me. I quickened my pace to catch up to her, thinking perhaps she was another late-night traveler heading to the village. As I got closer, I called out, "Excuse me. Are you heading to the village? Can we walk together?" She didn't respond. Instead, she slightly turned her head, enough for me to catch a glimpse of her face. My heart stopped. Her face was pale, almost lifeless, and her eyes, they weren't human. They were black pits, devoid of any light or emotion. Yet, they seemed to bore into my soul. I froze in my tracks, unable to move or even scream. She continued walking ahead, her figure fading into the dense shadows of the trees. A cold chill ran down my spine, and the faint stench of decay seemed to follow her. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I hurried forward, desperate to put distance between myself and that inexplicable figure. As I approached the end of the path, the faint outline of my home came into view. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. When I reached my gate, I noticed something unusual. A faint light flickered in one of the upstairs windows, even though I knew no one else was supposed to be home. The chill I had felt earlier returned tenfold. Pushing open the gate, I entered cautiously, calling out, "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed eerily in the stillness of the night. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding with every step. When I reached the top, I saw her again, the same woman from the trail, standing in the middle of my bedroom. Her back was to me, but I recognized the long, flowing hair and the tattered white dress she wore. My breath caught as she began to turn, ever so slowly. This time, her face was twisted in a grotesque grin, her mouth stretching impossibly wide. Before I could react, she vanished into thin air, leaving only the faint smell of decay behind. The next morning, I couldn't shake the terror of what I'd seen. I decided to speak to some of the older villagers about the incident. One of them, a frail woman named Mary, listened intently before sighing deeply. "What you saw wasn't a person," she said, her voice trembling. "Years ago, a young woman named Emily was brutally murdered on that very path. They say her spirit still roams there, seeking justice or revenge." I felt a chill as Mary continued. "Emily's death was never solved. Some say she attacks those who remind her of her killer. Others claim she's just a lost soul, unable to find peace. That night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of Emily's hollow eyes haunted me. I decided to return to the path, armed with a lantern and a prayer. As I walked the trail, I whispered softly, "Emily, I'm sorry for what happened to you. I mean you no harm." The wind picked up, and the faint smell of decay returned. Suddenly, she appeared again, her figure illuminated by the lantern's glow. This time, she didn't seem hostile. Her head tilted as if she were listening. "I don't know who hurt you," I continued, my voice shaking, "but I hope you find peace." For a moment, she simply stared. Then she slowly faded away, her form dissolving into the night. The stench disappeared with her, leaving only the sound of the rustling leaves from that night on. I never saw her again. The villagers said the path felt lighter, less oppressive, as if a great burden had been lifted. I still don't know if Emily found the justice she sought, but I like to think she finally found some measure of peace. As for me, I left the village soon after. The experience changed me, teaching me that some spirits, no matter how terrifying, just want to be heard. And now, whenever I walk alone in the dark, I can't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see her there, silently watching.